If you heal my son, I'll give you all 9 of my hotels. The Arab billionaire laughed, but it was Jesus Christ in disguise. Money can buy empires, but it cannot buy miracles. The words landed in the hospital room like a dare tossed into the dark. Some heard arrogance. Others heard a father unraveling. The billionaire's laugh followed thin brittle because laughter was the last armor he had left. He stood beneath soft, fluorescent lights, cufflinks, flashing eyes, bloodshot from months, without real sleep, staring at a child who had not moved in half a year. Across the room, monitors hummed their steady verdict. A neurologist lingered by the door, trained to keep distance from hope. A nurse paused mid-step, sensing the air shift. And the man everyone had dismissed, the quiet stranger in worn sandals, did not flinch. He did not ask for contract signatures or proof of funds. He simply looked at the boy. The billionaire's offer hung there, obscene and desperate, all at once. 9 hotels, 9 cities. 9 monuments to a life spent believing every lock had a key and every problem a price. He expected mockery or greed. What he met instead was silence, heavy, patient, like the pause before thunder. In that silence, something else stirred. A mother's prayer whispered years ago seemed to echo against sterile walls. A father's buried guilt pressed upward, aching to breathe. The nurse felt at first a stillness deeper than fear. The doctor felt it next, an unease no scan could explain. And the billionaire felt at last an unfamiliar sensation tightening his chest. Not panic, not anger, but the faintest crack in certainty. The stranger stepped closer to the bed. No entourage, no credentials, no urgency. Just hands, open eyes, steady, as if time itself had leaned in to listen. The machines did not change yet. The room did not erupt. But the rhythm of the night hesitated, as though the rules were being reread. Because money can purchase silence, influence, and delay. It can summon experts and build towers that scrape the sky. But it cannot command mercy. It cannot negotiate truth. And it cannot order a miracle. Not unless the one who gives them has already arrived quietly, unnoticed, standing at the edge of a promise made in laughter, ready to answer it with grace. Night pressed against the windows of the hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, turning the glass into a mirror of pale faces and blinking lights. Inside the private ICU room, time no longer moved forward, it circled. Every sound repeated itself, the measured hiss of the ventilator, the soft beep of monitors, the distant roll of carts in the hallway. 6 months had passed, yet the room felt trapped on the same unfinished night. Ethan lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets, his small chest rising, only because a machine allowed it. Tubes traced paths across his body like fragile lifelines. To the untrained eye, he looked asleep. To the doctors, he was suspended in a space medicine could describe but not cross. Brain trauma, minimal response. Prognosis guarded, then grim, then quietly rewritten as unlikely to improve. Dr. Grant Wallace stood at the foot of the bed reading numbers he had memorized weeks ago. He had delivered impossible news to powerful men before, but this case lingered. The scans did not lie. The cortex showed little activity. The brainstem barely whispered. Experience told him to prepare the family. Experience also told him that hope, when prolonged, could become its own kind of cruelty. Near the window, Omar al-Farouk stared at his son as if willing him to breathe on his own. The tailored suit hung looser now. His beard, once immaculate, carried streaks of gray he no longer bothered to hide. In boardrooms, Omar dominated with certainty. Here, certainty had abandoned him. Every morning he arrived before dawn. Every night he left long after visiting. Hours ended escorted out by nurses who no longer needed to ask his name. The staff had learned his routine. The way he pressed 2 fingers to Ethan's wrist, counting a pulse he already knew. The way he straightened the blanket as if order could coax life back into place. The way his eyes searched each new specialist for a crack in the verdict. Boston, Stanford, Cleveland. Each opinion had arrived polished and confident and left the same quiet wreckage behind. Nurse Maria Santos adjusted an IV and glanced at the father. She had seen grief wear many faces. Some cried, some prayed, some lashed out. Omar did none of those for long. He carried his sorrow like a weight he refused to set down, believing that if he endured it long enough, the universe might take notice. In another wing of the hospital, families slept in chairs or paced hallways with coffee cups clutched like talismans. But this room was different, larger, quieter, insulated from the ordinary chaos of illness. It had been designed for comfort, not for waiting, and yet waiting was all it contained. Somewhere deep inside, Omar memories replayed without warning. Laughter on a hotel balcony, a child leaning too far forward, a moment of inattention that split life into before and after. He had rewritten that instant 1,000 times, each version ending differently. None of them reached this room. By midnight, the doctor prepared to leave. The nurse dimmed the lights. The machines continued their vigil. And in the stillness, a truth settled over everyone present, spoken by no one, acknowledged by all. The world's best medicine had reached its limit here. What remained was silence, endurance, and a father standing at the edge of something money had never taught him how to face. Money had always answered Omar al-Farouk. It answered phone calls at impossible hours. It opened doors guarded by assistants with unreadable expressions. It summoned expertise across continents with a single signature. In his world, delay was an inconvenience and resistance a misunderstanding. When something broke, money fixed it. When something stalled, money accelerated it. In the first weeks after the accident, that reflex kicked in with precision. A private jet brought in a neurosurgeon from Boston before sunrise. Another flew overnight from California. Consultations were scheduled, back-to-back charts reviewed on tablets worth more than most people's cars. Each specialist spoke with authority, each promised diligence, and each left behind a familiar phrase, "We'll do everything possible." Bills climbed into the millions, and Omar paid them without reading. To him, the numbers were not costs. They were leverage. If one expert failed, another would succeed. If one protocol stalled, a newer one would emerge. Money, he believed, did not guarantee outcomes, but it widened the lane until success became inevitable. The doctors saw a different picture. They saw diminishing returns. More scans confirmed the same reality. More treatments produced the same flat lines. Dr. Wallace explained it carefully then, more carefully, still choosing words that preserved dignity without offering false hope. He spoke of probabilities, of thresholds the brain could not cross, of time working against them. Omar heard none of it. He heard only obstacles waiting to be removed. Nurse Maria watched the procession of specialists come and go. She watched Omar shake hands, ask sharp questions, take notes he never revisited. She watched him grow thinner as the weeks passed, as if each unanswered question carved something out of him. She had seen wealthy families cling to control before convinced that enough pressure could bend biology. It never did. Outside the room, the hospital moved on. Shift changes, admissions, recoveries, losses. Inside, the same scene replayed every day. Ethan did not stir. The machines did not vary. And slowly a realization pressed in, quiet, unwelcome, undeniable. Money could bring the best minds in the world to one bedside. It could keep a room private, silence hallways, and extend visiting hours beyond policy. It could shield a father from the ordinary indignities of waiting. But it could not teach damaged neurons to speak again. It could not persuade a brain to remember how to wake. The billionaire felt the boundary when anger stopped working, when bargaining lost its edge, when even his threats, veiled, then blunt, changed nothing. For the first time in decades, he stood before a problem that did not respond to escalation. Late one night, Omar sat alone, staring at a contract left unsigned on the table. Another specialist, another flight, another promise. His hand hovered, then lowered. Not because he had given up, but because something inside him finally understood the truth he had been avoiding. Money could build empires, but it could not command mercy. It could buy time, but not meaning. And as the machines continued their tireless rhythm, Omar faced a limit he had never encountered before, the place where wealth ends and something else must begin. The longer the silence stretched, the sharper Omar al-Farouk became. Grief did not soften him. It refined his edges. His patience thinned, his words shortened, his presence filled the room like pressure before a storm. Those who crossed his path felt it immediately, not as cruelty, but as certainty weaponized. When Dr. Wallace returned with another update, careful and restrained, Omar cut him off mid-sentence. "You're telling me what you can't do," he snapped, eyes never leaving the bed. "I didn't bring you here for limits. I brought you here for solutions." The doctor absorbed the blow with professional calm, but the message landed. In this room, explanations were excuses. Nurses learned to anticipate the shift in his mood. A delayed medication drew a glare. A routine question earned a dismissive wave. Policies that applied everywhere else bent here quietly because arguing took energy no one wanted to spend. Omar did not raise his voice often. He didn't need to. His authority had been practiced for decades in boardrooms where hesitation cost millions. To the staff, it became clear that this was not a man learning arrogance in crisis. This was arrogance revealed by it. The hospital was simply the first place where it no longer worked. Between calls, Omar paced. When the room felt too small, he stepped into the hallway and made demands into his phone, promising consequences to people who could not deliver miracles. He spoke the language he knew best: leverage urgency control, as if reality might respond out of habit. Nurse Maria watched from a distance. She recognized the pattern. Power that had never been questioned now bristled against resistance. She had seen it before in executives, politicians, celebrities, people used to bending systems until systems bent them back. Illness, she knew, was the one negotiation no one won. Late that afternoon, an argument spilled into the room. A visiting consultant tried to explain the difference between intervention and intrusion. Omar's hand struck the table, rattling a glass of water. "Do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" he demanded. The words hung there, heavy with a history that reached far beyond this hospital. For a brief moment, no one answered. The machines continued their indifferent rhythm. Ethan did not move. In that pause, something uncomfortable surfaced. The way Omar needed to be obeyed. The way he measured worth by outcome. The way frustration turned quickly into contempt. These were not traits born in the last 6 months. They were habits forged over years, perhaps decades, when success had rewarded aggression and silence had been mistaken for respect. The doctor finally spoke quietly. "I know who you are," he said, "and here it doesn't change the facts." Omar turned away, jaw clenched. He had built a life on winning by force of will. He had learned early that hesitation invited loss, that dominance protected what mattered. But standing there surrounded by machines that answered to no one, that strategy began to crack. What the hospital revealed was not just a powerless father, but the cost of a lifetime spent believing control was character. The past had shaped the man, and now, under the unforgiving light of crisis, that shape was unmistakable. And for the first time, Omar al-Farouk faced a truth he had always outrun. Pride could command rooms, but it could not command life. Desperation has a way of rearranging belief. For Omar al-Farouk, it began quietly after the arguments burned out and the hallways emptied. When authority stopped working and anger lost its bite, the nights grew longer. He remained in the room after the staff dimmed the lights, sitting with his back to the wall, listening to the machines breathe for his son. At first, he prayed the way powerful men bargain. Short sentences, clear terms, promises made with the confidence of someone used to closing deals. He vowed donations to hospitals he had never visited, checks to charities he barely remembered approving. He promised to be better later when this was over. Each prayer ended the same way, with silence. Then came the alternatives. A consultant mentioned an experimental protocol overseas. A private practitioner claimed success where others failed. Omar flew people in paid fees without receipts, nodded through rituals he did not understand. Some spoke of energy, others of alignment. None spoke of limits. He welcomed them all because limits had become unbearable. Nurse Maria watched these attempts with quiet concern. She had seen faith stretched thin before twisted into transactions reduced to superstition when fear took over. She noticed how Omar's eyes no longer searched for certainty, only for permission to keep hoping. One night, long past visiting hours, the room held only two sounds: the ventilator and the wind pressing against the glass. Omar stood beside the bed, his reflection fractured in the window. He reached for Ethan's hand, surprised again by how light it felt. The memory returned uninvited: his wife Helen kneeling by their bed years ago, rosary beads slipping through her fingers as she prayed for him. He had smiled then, indulgent, unmoved. Faith, he believed, was for those without leverage. Now leverage had abandoned him. His voice broke when he spoke again, softer this time, stripped of conditions. "God," he whispered, uncertain which God he meant. "If you're real, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what you want from me." The words felt clumsy, unfamiliar. They did not promise anything. They asked nothing specific. They simply admitted defeat. Dr. Wallace passed the doorway during his rounds and paused, hearing the low murmur. He did not interrupt. He understood the sound of man standing where science could no longer stand with him. He had heard it before, spoken in different languages, shaped by different faiths, but always carrying the same weight. Minutes stretched. Nothing changed. No alarms. No movement. The prayer did not summon light or answers. But something shifted in the room. Not relief, not hope, but honesty. For the first time, Omar was not negotiating. He was confessing his helplessness to an unseen listener. He sank into the chair, hands covering his face. The empire builder, the closer the man who never arrived without solutions, had reached the end of his own. And in that quiet collapse, his faith, whatever shape it might take, was no longer a tool to be used, but a question laid bare. What followed was not peace, but waiting. Not certainty, but surrender. And somewhere beyond the reach of money, beyond the grasp of control, the test of belief had finally begun. The knock came softly, almost apologetically, as if it did not expect to be answered. Nurse Maria glanced up from the chart, surprised. It was well past midnight, long after visitors had been turned away and conversations reduced to whispers. She stepped into the hallway and returned moments later, hesitation written across her face. "There's someone asking to see you," she said to Omar. "He insists." Omar did not look up. Insistence usually came with titles, credentials, or money. This came with none of those. "Who sent him?" Omar asked, already irritated. "No one," Maria replied. "He didn't ask for anything. He just said, he believes he can help." The words landed poorly. Omar let out a short, humorless laugh. After months of specialists and ceremonies, the last thing he needed was another stranger selling hope. "How much does he want?" he asked. "He didn't mention money," Maria said. "He looks ordinary." Curiosity, sharpened by exhaustion, finally won. Omar waved a dismissive hand. "Fine. 2 minutes." The door opened and the man stepped in without ceremony. No suit, no badge, no practiced confidence. He wore a simple jacket faded at the seams and sandals worn thin by miles. His hands were empty, his posture unremarkable. But the room seemed to quiet around him, as if sound itself had paused to observe. Omar's eyes moved over the man with open contempt. This was not how help arrived in his world. Help came, escorted, vetted, announced. This man looked like someone the lobby would have turned away on a normal day. "You," Omar said the word sharp with disbelief. "You think you can help my son?" The stranger did not answer immediately. He met Omar's gaze calmly, without challenge or submission. It was the look that unsettled Nurse Maria, first not fear, not ambition, but something steady, patient, as though he had all the time in the world. "The best doctors in the country have been here," Omar continued, voice rising. "I've spent more money than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. And you walk in dressed like this?" "I'm not a doctor," the man said quietly. "And I'm not here for your money." That did it. Omar laughed again, louder this time, the sound cracking at the edges. "Of course you aren't. Then what are you, a prophet, a healer? Another man who thinks desperation makes people foolish." Still, the stranger did not react. He simply stood there, absorbing the insult without flinching. The silence that followed pressed in, heavy and uncomfortable. Even the machine seemed louder by contrast. Omar stepped closer, breath sharp with frustration. "Say what you came to say," he demanded, "or leave." The man glanced toward the bed for the first time, toward the boy who had not opened his eyes in 6 months. His expression softened, not with pity, but with recognition. When he spoke again, his voice was low, steady. "May I see your son?" The question cut through the room. Not a pitch, not a promise, a request. Omar hesitated, surprised by the simplicity of it. Every expert before this had arrived armed with explanations and plans. This man asked only to look. The audacity of it stung. He gestured sharply toward the bed. "Go ahead," he said. "Do whatever it is you think you can do." As the stranger took a step forward, Nurse Maria felt a chill she could not explain. Dr. Wallace, passing the doorway again, slowed without knowing why. And Omar, watching the man approach his son, felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Not hope, not fear, but the first bruise to his certainty. Because nothing about this visitor fit the rules Omar had lived by. And for the first time since the accident, that frightened him more than the machines. The laughter came before the offer. It slipped out of Omar al-Farouk like steam from a cracked valve, sharp, incredulous, edged with fatigue. He had invited the stranger in out of impulse, not belief, and now the absurdity of it pressed down on him. A man in worn sandals standing beside a hospital bed, asking permission, as if permission mattered. Omar straightened, squaring his shoulders the way he did before closing a hostile negotiation. He took one step back, creating space, reclaiming control. "You want to look," he said. "Fine, but let's be honest about what comes next." The nurse hovered near the door, uneasy. She had seen families grasp at promises before, but this felt different, less hopeful, more theatrical. The doctor, pausing in the hallway, caught the tone and slowed, sensing a collision coming. Omar's voice hardened. "I don't have time for riddles. If you're here to pray, pray. If you're here to perform, perform. But don't pretend this is anything other than impossible." The stranger said nothing. He waited. That silence pricked Omar's pride. He mistook it for weakness and pressed forward. "Let's make it simple," he said, spreading his hands as if laying out terms on a table. "If you can wake my son, if he opens his eyes and breathes on his own, I'll give you all 9 of my hotels." The words hung in the air, heavy with spectacle. 9 hotels, 9 cities, assets valued in the hundreds of millions. To Omar, it sounded decisive, even generous. To the nurse, it sounded like a man trying to shout down despair. To the doctor, it sounded like grief dressed as bravado. Omar kept going, emboldened by the audacity of his own offer. He named them one by one, savoring the cadence. New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, Dallas, San Francisco. He smiled thinly. Deeds, keys, everything. Then he shrugged as if bored. "But we both know it won't happen." The challenge revealed more than it concealed. This was how Omar had always faced uncertainty, by raising the stakes until doubt backed away. In his world, confidence won deals, ridicule disarmed opponents. And when all else failed, money drew a line no one crossed. The stranger did not flinch. He did not smile. He did not counter. He only looked at Omar with a calm that felt strangely inappropriate, as if the offer had missed its mark entirely. So Omar concluded, laughter, returning brittle and defensive, "Either prove me wrong, or admit you're like the rest and walk away." For a moment, no one breathed. The machines continued their steady rhythm. The nurse felt the urge to interrupt and didn't know why. The doctor, still unseen in the hall, felt a tension he could not name. The stranger finally spoke, his voice even. "May I see the child? Not may I take the deal. Not may I accept. Just the question." Omar's smile faltered. He had expected greed, bargaining, at least acknowledgement. Instead, his grand offer seemed to fall to the floor untouched. He gestured toward the bed with a sharp flick of his wrist. "Be my guest," he said. "Show me your miracle." What Omar did not realize, what none of them could yet see, was that the deal had already been heard. Not as a contract to be signed, but as a confession spoken aloud. And somewhere beyond the reach of assets and titles, it was being answered on very different terms. The stranger stopped just short of the bed. He did not touch the child. He did not close his eyes or raise his hands. Instead, he spoke quietly, precisely as if reading from a ledger no one else could see. "Before we go any further," he said, "tell me something, Omar Al-Farouk. Do you remember the first hotel you ever bought?" The question landed wrong. Omar frowned, irritation flashing. "Of course I do," he snapped. "What does that have to do with the harbor view?" The stranger continued calmly. "On the outskirts of Detroit, 27 years ago, you paid $3.2 million, cash." The room went still. Nurse Maria felt the hairs on her arms lift. She had not expected names. Dr. Wallace, lingering in the corridor, stopped walking altogether. Omar's mouth opened, then closed. "Anyone could look that up," he said, though his voice had lost its edge. The stranger nodded once. "Then you'll also remember where the money came from." Omar laughed too quickly. "You're reaching." "It didn't come from your investors," the man said. "It came from the employee pension fund of your father's construction company. 217 workers. Men who trusted that fund to carry them through old age." The billionaire's face drained of color. "That's impossible," Omar said. "That file was sealed. The company collapsed 6 months later," the stranger finished. "You called it mismanagement, accounting errors. But you knew the truth. You moved the money and never put it back." The machines kept beeping indifferent witnesses. The stranger's voice did not rise. It did not accuse. It simply named. 3 of those men died in poverty. One froze in his apartment when the heat was shut off. One rationed insulin until his heart gave out. Another took his own life when his eviction notice arrived. Omar staggered back a step as if struck. "Stop," he whispered. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know their names," the stranger said gently. He spoke them anyway. Each name hit like a blow. Not figures, not statistics, names. Omar's knees weakened. He grabbed the back of the chair, breathing hard. Memories he had buried, deep letters, unopened phone calls, unanswered, a decision justified as temporary, rose to the surface with violent clarity. "No one knows that," he said hoarsely. "Not even my wife knew." The stranger finally turned to face him fully. His eyes were no longer merely calm. They carried something heavier, truth, without malice, justice, without rage. "You built everything you have on that first theft," he said. "Marble lobbies, penthouse views, 9 hotels standing on the suffering of people who never mattered to you." Nurse Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. Dr. Wallace stepped into the room without realizing he had moved. Omar slid down into the chair, his tailored suit wrinkling as if it belonged to someone else now. "I didn't think they'd die," he said weakly. "I thought I'd fix it later." "But you didn't," the stranger replied, and later became never. Silence crashed down harder than any shout. The deal, the laughter, the bravado, all of it evaporated, leaving only a man exposed before a truth he had outrun for decades. The stranger took one step toward the bed again and spoke with finality. "I will go in now," he said, "and when I touch your son, you will understand this. There are things money cannot hide forever, and debts it cannot erase." Omar could not answer. His empire, so carefully constructed, had just been reduced to its foundation, and it was cracked. The room seemed to shrink around Omar al-Farouk. The air pressed heavier against his chest as if the truth now spoken demanded space it did not have. He tried to stand straighter to summon the posture that had carried him through hostile takeovers and courtroom threats, but his body betrayed him. His hands trembled. His mouth opened without words. Dr. Wallace watched in silence, recognizing the moment for what it was. This was not shock from accusation. This was recognition, the kind that arrives when denial finally runs out of places to hide. Omar turned his face away, staring at the wall, as if it might erase what he had just heard. Images flooded back with merciless clarity. Envelopes stacked on a desk, letters marked urgent, the heat of a fireplace, in a winter office. He had told himself he would answer them later. He had told himself the company would recover, the money would return, the problem would dissolve. It never had. "They wrote to me," he said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "So many times." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't read them. If I read them, I'd have to act." Nurse Maria felt her throat tighten. She had seen confession in many forms, tears, rage, collapse, but rarely this naked. The billionaire who had bent rooms to his will now looked like a man stripped of language. "I burned the letters," Omar admitted, the words tearing free. "One by one, I told myself it was mercy, that I was sparing them false hope." He shook his head, a bitter sound escaping him. "I was sparing myself." The stranger did not interrupt. He did not press. He allowed the truth to finish its work. "I slept in hotels worth more than their houses," Omar continued, voice breaking. "I drank wine that cost more than their pensions, and I called it success." His shoulders collapsed inward. "I told myself I was a good man." Dr. Wallace felt the weight of the confession settle over the room. Medicine had nothing to add here. This was a different kind of emergency. Omar slid down into the chair, his head in his hands. "I see them now," he said. "Their faces, their families. I see what I did." He looked up, eyes red and pleading, not defiant anymore. "I didn't kill them with my hands, but I killed them all the same." The stranger finally spoke, his voice steady but unyielding. "You lived as if distance erased responsibility, as if time buried truth. It doesn't." The words did not crush Omar. They clarified him. Something inside him gave way, not pride alone, but the armor built to protect it. The man who had believed himself untouchable now faced the full weight of what he had become. "What do you want from me?" Omar asked, broken and exposed. "Confession, prison. Everything I have." His voice cracked. "I'll do it. Just tell me." The stranger looked past him toward the bed where Ethan lay unchanged. Justice must be faced, he said quietly. But mercy does not begin with fear. It begins with truth. Omar bowed his head, tears spilling freely now, no longer restrained by image or power. For the first time in decades, he did not defend himself. He did not negotiate. He did not reach for money. He simply remained there, stripped of illusion, standing alone before his conscience, finally unarmed. The stranger waited until the room settled, until the confession stopped echoing, and the tears slowed into quiet, uneven breaths. Then he spoke again, not as an accuser, not as a comforter, but as one who names the cost before the gift. You're asking for mercy, he said to Omar, but mercy is not a shortcut around truth. Omar lifted his head. His face was unrecognizable now. No calculation, no defense. Just fear and longing laid bare. I'll do anything, he said. I'll confess. I'll turn myself in. I'll give everything away. Just don't let my son pay for what I've done. The stranger shook his head gently. Fear can promise much, he replied. But fear doesn't change a heart. Transformation does. Dr. Wallace listened uneasy and compelled. He had counseled families through end-of-life decisions, through impossible odds, through grief that shattered language. But this was different. This was not a discussion about survival. It was about meaning. Justice matters, the stranger continued. What you took must be faced. What you broke must be repaired. But you don't earn mercy by panicking into obedience. Omar's hands clenched. Then tell me what you want. I want you to understand, the stranger said evenly, that grace is not cheap. It does not erase consequences. It doesn't pretend the past didn't happen. It redeems by demanding more than money, by demanding a new life. Nurse Maria felt a chill. She had seen wealthy donors give millions without blinking, only to return unchanged. This sounded nothing like a transaction. The stranger gestured toward the bed. Your son's suffering is not punishment, he said. It is a mirror. You now feel the helplessness you inflicted on others, the agony of watching someone you love suffer while you can do nothing. Omar's breath hitched. He nodded slowly as if the words were cutting paths he could no longer avoid. I feel it, he whispered. Every second. Good, the stranger said softly. Then don't run from it. Let it teach you empathy. Let it break you open. Omar fell to his knees, the movement sudden and unplanned. The polished floor met his hands. I don't deserve mercy, he said. I know that now. No one does, the stranger replied. That's why it's called grace. Silence followed, not empty but heavy with decision. The machines hummed. Ethan remained still. The room waited. I will pray for your son, the stranger said at last. Not because you offered 9 hotels, not because you begged, but because mercy is greater than justice. Omar looked up, hope flickering dangerously. Then he will live. The stranger did not answer the question. Instead, he offered a condition that cut deeper than any demand before it. If your son is healed, he said, you will not return to who you were. You will make restitution. You will face those you harmed. You will use what remains of your power to serve, not to dominate. And you will live that way whether anyone is watching or not. Omar swallowed. He understood now. This was not a bargain he could escape after the miracle. This was a road with no exit. I accept, he said, voice steady for the first time. Not to save myself, but because it's right. The stranger nodded once. Then watch carefully, he said, stepping toward the bed. What happens next cannot be bought, and it will change everything. The stranger stepped beside the bed and placed both hands gently on Ethan's forehead. There was no spectacle, no command shouted into the room. His eyes closed and his lips moved in words no one recognized, ancient, measured, carrying a weight that seemed to press against the walls themselves. At first, nothing happened. The ventilator continued its steady rhythm. The heart monitor traced the same familiar line. Dr. Wallace watched from the foot of the bed, arms crossed, instinctively, counting seconds. Nurse Maria held her breath without realizing it. Omar remained frozen on the floor, afraid that even hope might shatter what little remained. Minutes passed. The stranger's voice grew firmer, not louder, as if reaching across a great distance rather than raising volume. The air in the room felt dense, charged. Maria later struggled to explain it, only that the room felt occupied, as if something unseen had stepped inside, and asked everyone else to wait. Then it happened. A slight movement so small it could have been dismissed as imagination. Omar blinked hard. Ethan's right hand twitched. Just once. "Did you see that?" Omar whispered, his voice breaking. Dr. Wallace leaned forward sharply. "It's probably a reflex," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The fingers moved again. Slower this time. Deliberate. The monitor shifted. Numbers flickered. A nurse's station alarm chirped faintly down the hall. Maria rushed to the bedside, checking leads, checking connections. Everything was in place. Nothing explained what she was seeing. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. Omar scrambled to his feet, gripping the rail of the bed. "Ethan," he breathed. "Son." The heart rate climbed 55, 60, 68. The ventilator adjusted automatically, then paused as Ethan drew a shallow breath on his own. Dr. Wallace's professional detachment fractured. He stepped forward, issuing commands with urgency now. "Call neurology, now. Full team." Ethan's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, clouded, as if waking from a deep, distant sleep. Then they found Omar. His lips moved. A sound escaped, raspy, fragile, unmistakably human. "Dad!" The word broke something open. Omar collapsed against the bed, sobbing openly, pressing his forehead to his son's hand, as if anchoring himself to reality. Maria wiped tears she had not felt coming. Dr. Wallace stood motionless, staring as years of training failed to provide language for what was unfolding. Within minutes, the room filled with people, neurologists, ICU staff, imaging technicians. Orders flew. Ethan was rushed for scans, Omar never letting go of his hand until forced to. The stranger stepped back into the corner, silent, unnoticed amid the controlled chaos. The results arrived faster than anyone expected. Dr. Wallace read them once, then again, then a third time. His face drained of color. "This doesn't make sense," he said quietly. The scans from 4 hours ago showed near total cortical shutdown. "These," he swallowed, "these show normal activity. No swelling, no permanent damage." A neurologist shook her head in disbelief. "This kind of recovery doesn't happen," she said. "Neural tissue doesn't regenerate like this. Not overnight. Not ever." The stranger finally spoke. "Impossible for men," he said calmly. "Not for God." No one argued. No one could. By dawn, the verdict was unanimous. Ethan was awake, responsive, neurologically intact. Medically, there was no explanation. The charts would be debated for years. The scans would be reviewed, re-reviewed, and archived as anomalies. But for those in the room, the evidence was undeniable. A child who had not moved in 6 months had opened his eyes, and the line between the possible and the impossible had just been crossed. The room emptied slowly, as if reality itself needed time to catch up. Doctors stepped out with charts clutched too tightly. Nurses whispered in the hallway, glancing back as though the miracle might reverse if stared at too long. Dawn light crept through the blinds, pale and cautious. Only 3 remained. Ethan lay awake, exhausted but alive, sipping water in small, careful sips. Omar sat beside him, afraid to blink, his hand wrapped around his son's, as if the night might try to steal him back. And in the corner, unnoticed until now, stood the stranger. "Dad," Ethan said softly, his voice still thin. "When I was asleep, I wasn't alone." Omar froze. There was darkness. The boy continued, eyes searching the ceiling, as if remembering a distant place. "I was scared. But then he came. He took my hand and told me not to be afraid." Ethan turned his head slightly and looked toward the corner. "He said I could come back when you learned something important." Omar followed his son's gaze. The stranger stepped forward into the light. Omar's breath caught. "Who are you?" he asked, though his voice already trembled with recognition. The man lifted his hands, palms open. In the soft morning light, scars were visible, old deliberate wounds at the center of each palm, unmistakable. Not fresh, not symbolic, real. Omar staggered back a step. "No," he whispered. "It can't be. You prayed once with honesty," the man said gently. "Your wife prayed for years." Omar's knees buckled. Helen's face flooded his mind. Her quiet faith, her rosary worn smooth by devotion, her last request whispered through pain. "Don't let him lose his soul." You know her, Omar choked. I heard every prayer, the man replied, including the ones you ignored. The truth settled with devastating clarity. This was no healer passing through, no prophet chasing belief. This was Jesus Christ present not in thunder or spectacle, but in humility exactly as he had come the first time. I promised you my hotels, Omar said hoarsely, but I said it in mockery. I know, Jesus answered, and I take you seriously even when you do not. Omar bowed his head. I'll give them all, not to you, but to what you want them to become. Jesus nodded. Places of healing, refuge, restoration. Let what once served vanity now serve mercy. In the weeks that followed, Omar did exactly that. Lawyers protested, bankers questioned his sanity, headlines speculated, but deeds were signed, foundations formed. 9 luxury hotels became hospitals, shelters, rehabilitation centers, and homes for families with nowhere else to go. More difficult still, Omar sought out those he had harmed. He paid restitution. He apologized face to face. Some forgave him. Some never did. He accepted both. Years passed. Ethan grew strong. Inspired by what he had seen, he chose a life of service. Omar traded tailored suits for simple closed boardrooms for hospital corridors. He lived quietly, anonymously, content to be useful. When asked once why he gave everything away, Omar answered simply, because I was healed too. And if this story has reached you, if you've ever believed money, power, or success could save what truly matters, remember this: the greatest miracles are not those that wake the sick, but those that awaken the soul. This story reminds us of a truth many people in America learn only after loss. Success, money, and control can build impressive lives, but they cannot heal what is broken inside the human heart. Omar had everything the world praises: wealth, influence, access, yet none of it could save his son or quiet his conscience. Real change began only when pride collapsed and honesty took its place. The lesson is clear and deeply practical: grace is not cheap, and transformation always costs something real. It requires accountability, restitution, and the courage to live differently after the miracle. Whether we are business owners, parents, workers, or leaders, the question is the same. What are we building our lives on, and who is paying the hidden price? If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part moved you most. And don't forget to subscribe to Stories of Grace so you won't miss the next powerful story of faith, mercy, and real-life transformation.